Hello, everyone, and welcome to ELPC Thinks. I'm Howard Lerner. I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Law and Policy Center. And as you know, ELPC Thinks is where we bring together policy leaders, experts, environmental leaders, and our community partners to figure out new strategies for progress here in Chicago and around the full Midwest. A quick heads up, we'll be recording this webinar, streaming it live on Facebook, so we can share it with people who weren't able to join us today. And today, we're honored to have with us Forest Preserve of Cook County Superintendent Arnold Randall, who's my friend and who's been the leader of really improving and making the Forest Preserve such a great place to be around Cook County. As General Superintendent, Arnold Randall has done a terrific job. The forest preserves are working to bring more people out to enjoy nature and enjoy the forest preserves. Studies show how important nature is for physical and well-being, for people's mental health. And we've all come to appreciate that probably even more during COVID. General Superintendent Randall and his staff work to protect Cook County's most precious natural areas and to expand the preserve's commitment to ecological restoration. So we're going to hear from Arnold today. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to turn the microphone over to you to hear about the forest preserves of Cook County and your priorities, and then we'll have a conversation.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Howard. And it's always a pleasure to be with ELPC to talk about what we're doing in the forest preserves. And Howard, we really at the forest preserves appreciate the partnership and work that we've done together over the years. We want to continue that. So I value the opportunity to talk about our restoration work. So we can go to the next slide. The Forest Preserves of Cook County is nearly 70,000 acres of land in and around the city of Chicago, but throughout Cook County. We've been around for more than 100 years. We celebrated our centennial in 2015. And, 106 years ago, 107 years ago, local visionaries really realized the importance of protecting and preserving natural lands. They saw the future, and they saw the future was a lot of development, and realized that we need to protect these natural lands. So today, the Forest Preserves of Cook County, as I said, is nearly 70,000 acres, and that's about 11% of the county footprint, to put it into context. Go to the next slide. We're called a forest preserve, but it's a little bit of a misnomer because it's a lot more than that. Cook County is the most ecologically diverse county in all of Illinois. So I'll say that again, it's the most ecologically diverse county in all of Illinois. And it's kind of amazing when you think about it because it's also the most populated. And it's the second most populous county in the country after LA County, interestingly enough. The land protected by the forest preserves is a big reason why both of these statements can be true. The forest preserve protects woodlands, wetlands, prairies, savannas, and a little bit of everything in between. Most people think that that nature can take. We can go to the next slide. Most people think that nature can take care of itself. And I think that was the predominant thought for many, many years. But we realized that just having people live here in the numbers that they have for so long now has impacted our nature. It's degraded our nature, and so it's important that we work to help maintain healthy ecosystems. But roadways, pollution, invasive plants, climate change, all have contributed to the degradation of our natural lands, and it's a very real thing. Ecological restoration returns the land to health and creates an ecosystem that supports the diversity of native plants and animals. What you're seeing here is an example of the difference that we can make with careful ecological restoration. It's stunning what the restoration can accomplish. So if you look at, it's a year apart, in August of 2018, 2019, this is a pretty typical scene in unrestored properties in the forest preserves and really around the region. If you start to really look at it, you see a lot of undergrowth, a lot of buckthorn, invasive plants that choke out the healthy plants that had been there historically. And so when you see once that's removed, just a year later, you can see like the things that are starting to grow now, they have sunlight coming to the floor of the forest. Now they can grow, they can be successful. Go to the next slide. So as part of our centennial, as I mentioned in 2015, not only did we want to do some big things, but we wanted to make big plans. It was important to have a vision moving forward for the next 100 years. And so we worked with civic partners And we recruited a lot of folks from the nonprofit world, but people who had restoration and conservation backgrounds, but also people from business and education and other civic-minded folks to help us really plan for our future. This plan sets very ambitious goals. It's sort of the Burnham plan for the forest preserves, if you will. And it sets goals of where we want to go and a roadmap to get there. So it's not just a plan that's sort of pie in the sky, but it sets some very specific goals. During its first 100 years, the forest preserves focused on protecting land from development, which was super important. The next century conservation plan makes it clear that we now must go far beyond that. Restoring the land to ecological health is one of the top priorities for the next century conservation plan. We'll go to the next slide. Out of that plan came some other plans. I used to be the planning commissioner of the city of Chicago, so we're big on planning, but plans that you can use, not plans that sound good. To reach the goals of the next century conservation plan, we created a natural and cultural resources master plan. This was written in conjunction with the Prairie Research Institute of the University of Illinois. So we sought out third-party experts to help us figure out how to prioritize. This plan takes a step-by-step scientific approach to restoration using recognized techniques, and careful planning. It also prioritizes all of our preserves for restoration, taking into account the type of land, how much restoration needs to be done, and how rare or important our local ecosystems are. So if you can see on this slide, the picture on the lower bottom right side of the screen there is a page from that. And what it does is it gets into a level of detail. So in the left-hand corner of that, you see a sort of a map of the county. And to the right of that, you see a blow up of, specifically a site that we're looking at. And even below that, the biggest picture there is within that site, how we prioritize the work that we're going to do within that site. And it really has a lot to do with what needs to be protected most and what's the best way to get at that. And again, we use a lot of scientific method here to really figure that out and make priorities. And we feel like this has benefited us greatly as an organization, our ability to sort of think about where to spend our money and how to prioritize our money to get the biggest effect. Go to the next slide. So I'm going to go through a couple or three different projects that have made major differences, with restoration. So Deer Grove East, today, more than, I would say overall, we're managing about 15,000 acres overall in the forest preserve are under active restoration or active management. So that's a big deal because when I got here 11 years ago, it was like 1,500. So we've really moved the needle on that. The biggest job is usually clearing brush or removing invasive species like buckthorn and honeysuckle, which you saw in that previous photo. And then typically planting native seeds by volunteers and staff. Here in Deer Grove East, one of our biggest recent restoration projects, it started back in 2008 with volunteers, funding from the O'Hare Modernization and Mitigation Account, and management by our partner, Open Land. So we are really open to working with partners to further our mission, and Open Lands and EPLC and ELPC and others have really been great partners with us. Here at Deer Grove East, over 180 acres of wetlands and prairies have been restored at Deer Grove. Now we're working on Deer Grove West, which interestingly enough was the first property that the Forest Preserve bought over 100 years ago. So we're continuing to work and do this type of restoration work throughout the system. Go to the next slide. Powderhorn Lake. So hydrological work can be another big part of our restoration work as well. So there's a lot of waterways, a lot of bodies of water in the Forest Preserve that are super important to ecosystems. In many cases, with hydrological sites, that means removing old drain tiles for what had been agricultural fields. So Illinois was historically the prairie state, then it really became more of a farm state more than anything. And so we took these natural areas and we made them farmland. And now our job is to return them back to natural state. So that means removing old drain tiles, which had allowed agricultural fields to be successful. But once you remove them, then it allows wetlands and historic water flows to reestablish, which then brings back plants, insects, birds, and other animals that can live in these habitats. And it's very interesting, all the impacts that it has. And when you see certain animals start to come back, it's one of the many signs of being successful in what you're doing. At Powderhorn, we're being even more ambitious. and Powderhorn, just for a sense of geography, this is on the far southeast side of the city of Chicago in a very industrialized area where a lot of steel mills historically were. And then you've got this really beautiful natural space tucked in between all of that. And so it's fascinating that it's there, and we're very lucky that it's there. But like most locations across the Calumet region, a century of urban and industrial developments fundamentally altered the natural conditions at Powderhorn. When the lake fills, water flows into the swales of the nature preserve, increasing invasion by weeds and destroying native habitats, including rare and threatened species of plants. And at the northern end of the lake is no longer shallow enough to provide an effective fish nursery. This 3-year project is restoring more than 100 acres of wetlands by reconnecting the northern marsh or Powderhorn Lake, which was once a shallow wetland, to Wolf Lake, which is nearby. We're using a water control structure at the north end that will allow us to lower or maintain the water level as needed to recreate historic conditions. And this is actually, if you had time to go out there, this is a very interesting project because the connection between this and Wolf Lake and all the different ways of making that happen is a fairly complicated process, but we're very hopeful that it will do the job. Next item is really talking about controlled burns. When I looked at this picture, I thought it made me think of some geysers out in Yellowstone or something, but it's actually land here in Forest Preserve where we're actually burning the land. This is a common technique that we use, and again, they're called controlled burns. Historically, periodic fires were set by Native Americans, and they cleared land, renewed food resources, and allowed Native Americans to pursue game and more. And it shaped our native prairies, savannas, and woodlands over a millennia. Today's prescribed burns mimic these intentionally set fires under specific favorable conditions, meaning if it can't be too windy and it can't be too wet, and it can't be the lands can't be too green either, because it has to be dry enough for them to burn, and it also has to mean a lot of the animals that would be there would be in hibernation, so they wouldn't be impacted. Under these favorable conditions, highly trained Forest Preserve staff members, private contractors, partners, and volunteers conduct prescribed burns across hundreds of acres of land each spring and fall. Prescribed burning benefits restoration efforts by limiting the growth and spread of unwanted species, so it burns out a lot of that stuff that is invasive, promoting a growth of important native trees like oaks and hickories, and those are fire-resistant trees, so they survive these and they do well. It also gives a native species a jump start in the spring. The black burnt earth that follows a prescribed burn absorbs the sun's light and warms the ground more quickly at the beginning of the growing season. And then it also returns nutrients and dead plant matter back to the soil, nutrient cycling, and more quickly. Nature preserves. So one of the dividends of years of restoration work by the Forest Preserves is that many nature preserves are recognized by the state of Illinois. And Illinois nature preserve dedication is not a minor feat. It means that these lands have to be managed at a really high level, and that the ecological value of them has increased to a point where they are able to attain this level of recognition and protection. The Forest Preserves of Cook County has 27 dedicated Illinois nature preserves, 5 Illinois land and water reserves totaling approximately 10,405 acres. This is the most of any local agency and only second to the state of Illinois itself. So we're really proud that we're managing these lands in a way that we've received this kind of recognition and protection from the state. And again, really only second to the state itself in acreage and numbers of preserves. Illinois nature preserves protect rare plants, animals, and other unique natural features, including now uncommon ecosystems like tallgrass prairies, oak savannas, sandstone bluffs, wetlands, and bogs. Illinois is known as the prairie state, but the reality is that only less than 0.1%, I think, is the number of prairies that existed pre-settlement by non-Native Americans exist today. So they're really rare, and it's really important that the places that they do exist are places like the Forest Preserves of Cook County. These high-quality natural areas and habitats are endangered, and threatened species are permanently protected by state law. So these are, again, are really important designations and help us to protect. This is our core mission, to protect these type of lands and the animals that exist on them. And then our final slide. Excuse me. So cups of coffee are not typical Forest Preserve talking points, but I will just go with me here. So we're doing as much restoration as our resources allow. We really feel, we know we've worked really hard to show the public, taxpayers, anybody who's interested in nature, that we're really we're being not only the best stewards of the land, but the best stewards of the resources that we have to manage the land and to do the programming that we do. We actively seek out grants and look for external partners to do this work, and we feel like we've leveraged all of those things, and it's important to do that. But the preserves have been facing a severely limited budget for many years, particularly considering the ambitious goals of the Next Century Conservation Plan, which has really high goals. You know, we want to restore 30,000 acres of lands to a high quality ecological state. We want to do much more programming, when all these things that are sort of tied to what our mission is to further the mission of the forest preserves. Currently, less than 1% of the Cook County property tax bill goes to the forest preserves. In many municipalities, it's less than 0.5%. The average homeowner in Cook County pays $3 to $4 per month toward the forest preserves, and that's the same as 1 or 2 cups of coffee, depending on the type of coffee that you drink, I guess. Some of us have more expensive taste than others. Advocates for the forest preserves have proposed a referendum to bring in more resources for the forest preserves. So as advocates are leading the charge, as a forest preserve employee, I cannot advocate for or against. I can only tell you what the resources are and the impacts that it has on what we're doing. Our Board of Commissioners, the Forest Preserve Board of Commissioners, has voted to put this referendum on the ballot for this November 2022 election. This specific increase would be 1/4 of 1/10 of 1%. So 1/4 of 1/10 of 1%, or 0.025%. For a Chicago home with a fair market value of $262,000, the increase would be about $22 a year. That's or less than $2 a month. So I think it's you know, sort of making the case that it's a good investment, and we worked really hard to make sure that the preserves are closer to what they really should be, and healthier, both ecologically and otherwise, and that they're a great destination for Cook County residents and people around the region to get out to nature and experience nature and really immerse yourself in nature. I have this picture behind me. It's just a typical picture I take when I'm walking in the woods. It's a beautiful place, and it's getting healthier by the day. So Howard, that's my presentation. I'd be glad to take any comments.
Arnold, thank you very much for your presentation, and more importantly, thank you for what you're doing every day, which is, you know, just terrific. The forest preserves are a place that are enjoyed by so many of us, and they're a place that just keeps getting better due to the work of a lot of people. But you're the general superintendent. You're the guy with the hand on the wheel. You've done a great job. You really have. So one of the things you've been doing is bringing more people out to the preserves and trying to find ways, everything from hiking to biking to camping. There are a lot of people who don't know all the forest preserves have to offer. They don't spend much time in nature. Talk a little bit, if you would, about the new programs you're offering.
For sure. Well, I'll start with saying the biggest way that people, the biggest way that people encounter the forest preserves are using the trail system, and that's always been the case. We really have spent a lot of time and energy on adding new trails to the system, better connections to the system. We built about 15% of our total trail system in the last 10 years. So that's pretty significant. We have 350 miles of trail in the forest preserve. About half of that is paved. The other half are dirt or stone or more primitive trails. And that's a way, obviously, people walk and ride their bikes, like birding. There's all these things you can do to immerse yourself in nature on our trail system. So really have invested in that. On a more recreation-based side, we have really focused. We've built new campgrounds, and we opened new campgrounds back in 2015. Camping was not allowed in the forest preserve unless you were part of the Scouts or some organized group for 50 years prior to that. And we thought that seemed ridiculous, and certainly wanted to offer camping. And it has been immensely popular. And so camping in the forest preserves can mean traditional tent camping. We have really beautiful and really nice cabins that people are very happy to use. We have bunkhouses, which if you have a larger group and you want to bring a bigger group out that hold up to at least 30 people. And then there's even RV hookups for folks. So there, we found that there's a thriving RV community that comes through the Cook County area and spends times in the Forest Preserve as well. We've really pushed on the program side to do a lot more environmental programming, whether it's special events or just leading hikes, whether day hikes, night hikes. We have fishing programs. We certainly spend a lot of time and energy teaching people how to canoe and kayak, for example. And we have programs where we teach people how to do that, and then they can bring their groups out and use, we have canoes and kayaks available for them. So it's really about teaching people how to immerse themselves in nature in a lot of different ways. And at our nature centers, for example, which have been around, we're celebrating a 90th anniversary for our oldest one soon. It's important that people have this opportunity to connect at nature centers with staff who can then take them on hikes and teach them about nature. So we talk about it as sort of, you can create your own journey, your own adventure in the forest preserves. There's so much to do that you can do on your own. And if you feel like you want to engage with people, our special events are awesome. So, it's a great way to get out and get connected with nature that way as well.
How's the camping working out? Are they booked far in advance? Are people doing it? Just what's the experience been over the last 6-7 years you've tried it?
It has grown every year. We flattened out a little bit during 2020 because of the pandemic, but quickly got back. We're back at record high numbers. So every year the numbers increase. The weekends obviously are the most popular times, but you can, we open up our camping bookings at the beginning of the year, and so people can do that. If you've got some time and you're taking a break in the summer, weekdays tend to be a little bit more available. There are great opportunities for things like kids' birthday parties. So I've taken my kids over the years where we've done camping trips at one of our campgrounds, and the kids pitch a tent outside and the parents sleep inside the cabin. There's a lot of. If
the general superintendent and his family don't do a tour of the parks, do a tour of the preserves, something's missing.
Right. Yeah.
That's great.
It's a lot of fun. And so the value of the campgrounds in a lot of ways is that they're close, right? And so if you've never camped before, you're not certain about it, it's a great way to start. And our campgrounds range from being kind of a entry-level camping experience to something that's much more remote, and you feel like you're in Wisconsin or Michigan. And my wife and I were certainly the same folks who would drive by the forest preserves on our way up to Michigan or to Wisconsin or Starved Rock to go camping. And when I came into this position, and President Preckwinkle, who's been an awesome leader on this and has also camps, we recognized that camping was a way that a lot of people get their first introduction to nature. And so we wanted to make sure that that was available. And so the numbers have gone up every year, again, with the exception of 2020, but we're back on track. And they're making money even, which is, they can support themselves. Yeah, they can support themselves, which is great.
I know you've made it a priority to restore more land guided by the Natural and Cultural Resources Master Plan. Can you give us some examples of land you're restoring?
Yeah, so there are 4 major areas. This plan is great because, we used to have these disagreements sometimes with our volunteers about what the priorities should be. And it was important to take some time and have a very open, transparent process to really figure out what the priorities should be, and then get some expertise from U of I, which we're very thankful to help us referee that whole process and make sure that we have a plan that we can all get behind. And now we do. We have a plan that we can all get behind. So you've got places out in the far south end of the county, like at Wampum Lake, and it's called the Jurgensen Woods Complex out in the Lansing area, that are phenomenal. These incredible places. And so that became a high priority just because of what's there and what needed to be protected. But then you've got preserves way on the far north end, for example. We're doing work up along the Skokie Lagoons area, for example. So there's just a lot of key sites, and certainly if you want to get into detail with folks about where they are, it's all listed on our website, and you can see the areas that are priorities for us. We spend a lot of resources with contractors, but with our own staff, and then our volunteers have been phenomenal as being part of it. So we partner with volunteers, and they can help with both the removal, but also the reseeding and the, you know, the repropagating of some of these sites. So it's pretty cool. And Palos, I'll just, because the people always ask me what are the really cool sites. So Palos, the whole Palos area in general is
Sure,
pretty phenomenal.
it's
Because
great.
it's hilly, you know, it's got all these rolling hills, and we've done a ton of restoration work in Palos. And so now that I've been here for as long as I have, seeing the difference is just so encouraging. You can see through the woods and it's healthy, and you can see there's terrain that you didn't even realize was there because there was so much buckthorn and this undergrowth. You couldn't see what was around you beyond the trail, and now you can, and you can see all the things that are happening. And we've got bald eagles nests that are back that didn't exist for many years, up until maybe 5 years ago. And so there's animals that are coming back because the ecosystems are healthy, and there's plants that are growing that are healthy. So they're really all over the place, but we've got 4 major sites throughout the county. And if you want to look up any of these plans, they're all on the website, and you can read the detail and how we prioritize the work.
You know what? Let's take a couple of questions about bikes and animals. Okay.
Yeah.
I've been following the chat box and the Q&A. David Bryant's asking, is there any plan to connect the I&M Canal and Brookfield Zoo via bike path? And Arthur Crumry is asking about, how about e-bikes? On the one hand, it enables people who are less strong bikers to get around a little bit better through the preserves. On the other hand, somebody zipping by while you're walking or with a kid with a stroller might be disconcerting. Talk a little bit, would you, about
Sure.
that potential trail and about e-bikes?
We are constantly looking to expand our trail system. I know we're doing some things in that area, and frankly, I'd have to talk to our planning staff just to get the latest on what we're doing out there. But I can tell you that we're actively working with local municipalities to connect to our trail system. And they're actually paying for it in some cases because they recognize the value of getting their residents into the preserve. So I know we've done some things out there with the local municipalities. And, you know, if you want it, we actually have a trail master plan, which you can take a look at on our website as well. The e-bike issue is very interesting. So we spent a lot of time about a year, maybe 2 years ago, talking about this internally. And because there were questions about, should we be allowing e-bikes or not? So we do allow e-bikes, and there's a couple different classes. There's a class 1 and class 2. So we allow the one that allows for a lesser speed for e-bikes. As a person who's in his mid 50s now, I certainly recognize the importance of having some assist there, particularly if you're going up hills and maybe you can't ride just the way you used to ride. Or there are people with who just have disabilities who e-bikes benefit greatly. And so we recognize that allowing them is the right thing to do. People speeding on their bikes in the forest preserves is not a new issue. It's not an issue that we just have. There are all the local counties around us have the same issues. So our focus really is on people riding too fast, not necessarily what type of bike they're riding. And so, because you can ride really fast and too fast on a traditional bike as well. And we see that all the time. And so what we work with is we do a special program called Share the Trails, where it's really an educational focus and talking to people about how do you share the trails, because not only are people biking, they're walking, they're jogging, they're riding horses in some places.
Yep.
There's all these things that go on our trail system. And so it's really an educational process. And most people understand if you educate them, they will be respectful or whatever. But there's some that, there's people who just like to go fast sometimes. So our Trail Watch volunteers, we have a program called Trail Watch, and they're volunteers for us who are out in the preserves all the time, and they give us feedback on where there are issues and when there are issues with people riding too fast. But every year we'll give a special focus to our Share the Trail initiative. We've done it ourselves. We've also done it as part of Chicago Wilderness, a larger organization, alliance of open space folks and conservation folks, where we've done it throughout the region, and sort of sharing the same message about riding safely, not riding too fast, being aware of who's around you.
Don't be a jerk.
Right.
Don't be a jerk.
Actually, Will County did a fun piece on that, basically saying don't be a jerk on the trail system. People get, you're out there, there'll be places you're riding, nobody's around you, and then you get going, and sometimes you have to make sure you're aware that people will be around you at some point.
By the way, my colleague Lena Reynolds asked, the bike paths are an important transportation corridor for people getting around the city and Cook County. Are you thinking at all about opening them up and not closing them at night or at least at dusk?
Yeah, well, the challenge for us, there are places where that does happen, and it tends to be in areas where it's a little more urbanized than others. The problem or the challenge for the forest preserves is we're off the grid for the most part. There are most places in the forest preserve there is no electrical, there's no water, it's just like being out in a state or national park in some ways. So we're not going to be putting up lighting along our trails, not like the park district does or whatever. It's just not going to happen, and it's really not our mission to do that. But where there are places where it makes sense, we've allowed some of that. It's the forest preserve. There's not a big fence around the whole forest preserve, so we know that people will be riding through sometimes, and we discourage it in most cases just because it's not well lit at night, and you're really subject. There could be some difficulties there, but there are places, particularly in the city, that we know people ride through at night, and it's a little more well lit. But generally speaking, it's beyond our capacity to light all those things. And I don't think, even if we had the money, I don't think that's something we want to do.
Robin Goals asked a question about there's a lot of thinning of trees going on in the forest preserve she's seen. What's up with that?
Yeah.
And my colleague Kevin Brubaker is asking about there appears to be a deer overpopulation in a number of the forest preserves.
Sure. Yeah.
What are you doing to address it?
So the restoration means a few different things. So restoration means removing invasive plants like buckthorn and garlic mustard, and there's a whole list of these things that are undergrowth. It also means restoring areas that were historically, if it was historically a prairie or if it was historically a wetland or a savanna, restoring it to those pre-development days. And so there's all this mapping and education and research has gone on over decades to identify what some of these places looked like before people settled, non-native people settled these areas and started fundamentally changing the landscapes. So in some of these areas, now you've got, a whole bunch of trees that have grown that are not oak or hickories or whatever that have grown, and in some cases remove some of those to restore it back to a savanna, which is sort of a mixture of open and wooded area. So you'll see some of that in some places. But what that also means is some things, like when it's so shrouded with a lot of other things, the sunlight doesn't get to the floor of the forest, and some things that are there can't grow. So the whole intention behind it is allowing the native plants that are still in the seedbed there, they still exist, the sunlight to grow. And some of these things like oaks take a long time to grow. Obviously, really, that's why they live so long. Some of those won't be as successful if there's not enough sunlight coming to the floor. So that's some of the thought behind is restoring these to what they were historically based on historic records. And you'd be fascinated to know how much of that's out there in the written descriptions from early folks who settled this area, what was here historically. I'm sorry, what was the second question, Howard?
The second question was about deer overpopulation.
So just to frame it a little bit, the deer have no natural predator anymore in our region, right? So there are animals that used to exist here that don't exist here, like wolves, and not in the wild, or bears or whatever, things that would kill, would sort of keep the deer population down. And so we do some deer management, but we have to be very selective about it. And some folks would say we don't do enough, and others say we shouldn't do it at all, right? So there's we live in an urban population, and so sometimes can be a controversial issue. But we do some deer management. The animals that we do take out every year, they are the meat is given to homeless shelters, and so we try to be really thoughtful about where that goes. But if you don't manage the deer population, they can overrun and really do a lot of damage to the lands themselves. But they also get sick and die. It's unhealthy for that population. They really can't be supported by just what's out here, and so there's challenges with that. So deer management is an important thing to what we do. I would suggest, depending on who you talk to, some people like to see a lot more of it happen than it does.
We're going to move to wrap up, Arnold. And one of the things I've always just thought was remarkable with forest preserves is more than 100 years ago, some people looked at it and said, let's look ahead. Let's look to the future. Chicago's going to grow. Cook County is going to grow, and let's protect this wonderful system of forest preserves and put it there before it gets overwhelmed. And if today, you know, Tony Preckwinkle and Arnold Randall and Howard Werner and all sorts of other people were to say, let's go create a Cook County forest preserves, people would say, where in the world would we ever get the land? How would we ever buy it? It was that sort of far-sighted conservation action that led to the wonderful opportunity you have. And you've expanded a little bit over the last few years, and hopefully the referendum will enable some more resources to help do that going into the future, which would be terrific when it goes forward. We're looking at a lot of opportunities here and around the Midwest at ELPC of how do we take some of the land areas, some of the waterways that haven't been protected yet, and how can we look ahead and do things today that 100 years or maybe 50 years or 20 years from now, people look at and say, wow, they thought about that opportunity to preserve some more land. And that's what you're doing in the forest preserves, finding other parcels, finding ways to add to it, and finding ways to restore it and make it better. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you to the board of Cook County and the Forest Preserve Board, which is one and the same.
Yes.
But more fundamentally, thank you to what you and your team are doing to make the forest preserves a great place for all of us. And those of you who attended today, please join me in expressing your appreciation to General Superintendent Arnold Randall. I urge you to stay in touch with us at ELPC. We'll be hosting more of these ELPC Thinks going forward, and we'll invite you to please join us. All right. Thank you, Arnold, and take care, everybody. All right.
Thank you.